And thank you all for your patience. And
Thank you very
without
much.
further ado, Linda Jackle.
All right. Thank you again for your patience. The goals today are to help you better understand the properties of soil, to help you appreciate the importance of healthy soil, and to show you how you can make positive changes to your soil quality. Whether you're interested in having a lush landscape, an abundant food crop, or in helping create a better environment, an understanding of soils is very helpful. Let's start by looking at soil development. Soil is defined as the topmost layer of the Earth's crust. Its development begins with bedrock. Simply put, bedrock, which is nearest the Earth's surface, is broken down by repeated exposure to wind, water, and temperature extremes. Organic matter then, from plants and animals, adds to the finely weathered rock, and we end up with soil. Just how long it takes for soil development is greatly dependent on the type of bedrock as well as weather conditions. In the Flint Hills, it can take 500 years or more for an inch of topsoil to develop under the prairie grasses due to the hardness of the flint. These show different physiographic regions. They share distinct properties that determine the type of soil and how long it takes for soil to form. Shawnee County is divided into 2 regions. The bedrock development here began 250 to 300 million years ago. That's when Shawnee County was covered with shallow seas. When those seas receded, sedimentary rocks remained. Then 750,000 years ago, more recently, glaciers moved into the northern section of the county and deposited quartzite boulders and areas of thick silt. So why is this important? Well, the bedrock, as you've hopefully just learned, which is sandstone, limestone, and shale, is our mineral matter in our soil. It makes up nearly half of our topsoil, and it is a constant that cannot be changed. Mineral matter is classified by particle size and gives soil its texture. This map shows the 8 different soil associations in Shawnee County. It's determined mostly by particle size of the subsoil, but also like slope and elevation that impact drainage is considered. Although there's 8 different associations, and they do vary somewhat, the range of textures is not really too great. I've plotted it on this soil textural triangle. And the areas highlighted in yellow show the type of soils that we have in Shawnee County. If you'll notice, there's one word in all of them, and it is clay. However, it doesn't say heavy clay, which was a surprise to me. If I pick a midpoint, and that's what this star represents, it looks at, we have an average of 40% clay, and look at the bottom, you could read up, and 20% sand. Ideal soil is considered loam. And it's pretty much just the opposite in its percentages, with 20% or less of clay and 40% sand being a midpoint. When I look at this, I go, I just need more sand. So couldn't I just dump more sand into my soil? Well, the answer is no. Clay soils have are highly structured at the atomic level, kind of like crystals. And the large sand particles tend to provide a surface onto which the tiny clay particles adhere. The result is a product more like concrete, and we don't want concrete. All right, let's take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of our soil textures, keeping in mind the difference in particle size. Clay being very small, they pack together well and it feels smooth. Sand, larger particles are going to feel much rougher. This is to indicate surface area. Nutrients and water adhere to surfaces. More surface area holds more water and nutrients. The larger represents sand, smaller clay. Much like a child who is wanting some Nutella spread on an apple. The more Nutella, the better, right? So would he rather have it spread on a whole apple or an apple cut in pieces? many more surfaces on the apple cut in pieces for the Nutella to adhere. Another thing I want to talk about is cation exchange capacity. All you really need to know about that is that clay is a little bit of a negative charge, and many of those nutrients that we want to have in our soil for our plant roots are positively charged. This is why clay holds on to those nutrients a little better and doesn't let them leach down into the subsoil away with the water. The higher the clay fraction, the better. And if you have organic matter, that has an even higher cation exchange capacity. Okay, these factors help to explain soil properties as they relate to texture. Clay soil has high nutrient holding capacity. It has high water holding capacity. However, for the same reasons, it has poor internal drainage. It gets saturated and then is slow to dry out. It crusts when it dries. It's slow to warm up, becomes compacted if worked when wet, and has a high shrink and swell capacity. Sandy soils are pretty much what you would think, the opposite. Good aeration, good drainage, good water infiltration, less prone to compaction and good heat convection. The negatives is that it requires more frequent watering, not at all drought tolerant, and requires extra fertilization. If you want to know your soil texture, this is a fun little thing you can do. Get some of your topsoil, moisten your hands, and try to make it into a ball, a firm ball. After that, try to squeeze it between your fingers and thumb like this picture shows. If you're able to squeeze out, extrude, I guess you would say, a ribbon, you've got clay soil. The longer ribbon you can make, the more clay. If you can't make a ribbon, but it does make a firm ball, then you probably have soil that has a good soil texture. If it won't even hold together, it's too sandy. So that gives you a pretty good idea of your soil texture. All right, pore components. Soil components, excuse me. Number 2 is pore space. Pore space provides the plant roots with air and water. Soils need enough available pore space to allow oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. Oxygen levels drop as you go deeper into the soil. In the air, they're about 21%. Then as you drop, you get just 12 to 18%, and that's where new roots can form. It depends, of course, on how loose your soil is. Then you go down to, if you only have 5 to 10% of oxygen, your roots will grow, but if they have less than 3%, they'll die. This is why even trees have majority of their roots in the top foot of soil, because they need that oxygen. Okay, the next component, part of the pore component is water. In this diagram, you see it's all water. Saturated soils eliminate oxygen from pore spaces. Most plants will die within a week if the soil is completely saturated. In the case of your lawn or your turf, it can die actually in just a few hours if it's a very hot day and that water heats up. It basically boils the water, the plant roots. Other plants, and especially trees and shrubs, have varying degrees of tolerance for flood. So if you are in a flood-prone area, I would advise you to research your plant choices before you put them in the ground. All right, so we talked about the pore space sharing with air and water. So what is the secret? How much water? How much air? The best way to understand this is to talk about field capacity. Field capacity is the amount of water left in the soil after all excess has drained away due to gravity. I think of a houseplant in a pot when I think about field capacity. What I do is bring my house plant over to the water faucet, and I water it slowly and saturate the entire top of the soil. Once the water starts running out the bottom, I stop watering. And then I wait until the water is drained out and put it back on the saucer. That means when the water is drained out, that it has reached field capacity. If you feel the soil, it's moist, but not soggy. This is the ideal amount of water. And it's a little harder to find out how much you water for your in-ground plants, but one trick is after you've watered, wait about 30 minutes and take a long screwdriver, stick it in the soil, and see how far you can stick it in until it reaches resistance. Once you've met resistance, that's how far you've you've watered, I guess. And then know how deep, of course, your roots are. If you watered deep enough for what's in there. Your grass doesn't grow as deep, the roots aren't as deep, so you don't need as much. Your trees, of course, are going to need a lot more water. All righty. Now, organic matter. Organic matter is only 5%, or averages about 5%. It can be anywhere from 3 to 8%, but it's very, very important for soil quality. It helps with soil fertility, provides good physical properties, and biological activity. Organic matter is a diversity of living or once living organisms. And this is a concept that I didn't understand until recently, that we have different types of living organic matter. 5% or more should be living organisms, 10% or more fresh residue, somewhere around 40%-ish decomposing, and another 40% stabilized organic matter. Oops. All right. The living portion of soil organic matter includes a fantastic number of many types of organisms. The more complex or varied the soil organic matter and root systems, the healthier the soil. This next reminds me of a dad joke. What do you call a fungi that makes music? A decomposer. Okay, let's talk about decomposers and fertility. That's the first function of organic matter. These soil organisms break down and consume plant material, increasing the nutrients and keeping the nutrients in the rooting zone for later use. One of them that you're probably familiar with is some of the types of fungi. They decompose and they increase nutrient availability. You probably can't see the bacteria out there. They can decompose, increase available nutrients. This one adds phosphorus and recycles nitrogen, carbon, and sulfur. This soil organism both releases nutrients as waste and retains nutrients in the rooting zone for later. Like if this is a bacteria that doesn't decompose, but it does add a lot of nutrients to its soil. And I would imagine a lot of you are familiar with this. It forms on the roots of legumes and is responsible for converting atmospheric nitrogen into a form that can be used by plants. This year I planted green beans, which is a legume. And then later I planted in the same area, I planted squash. The squash did great. There are vines everywhere, almost too much. It's because the added nitrogen that the green beans gave to my soil. All right, another function of living organic matter is soil structure. Soil organisms improve structure or tilth for better infiltration and water holding capacity of soils. One example is called glomulin. It's a substance formed by mycorrhizal fungi. The fine strains of fungi combine with bacterial secretions and root hairs to form and stabilize larger aggregates. Earthworm castings and fecal pellets of arthropods also improve soil structure, as does the slime and feces of slugs and snails. Still don't like them though. Burrowing helps to improve porosity along with water infiltration and water holding capacity. Third function of organic matter that is living is plant health. This to me was probably the most interesting of all topics when it comes to organic matter. Oops, skipped one, there you go. Soil organisms may prevent soil pathogens from establishing on plant surfaces. They may prevent pathogens from getting food and growing. They may also feed on the pathogens. Bt is a naturally occurring bacteria. I can't pronounce it, so I'm not going to try to. It can generate metabolites that are toxic to or inhibit pathogens. What's really neat is that the strains of Bt can now be grown and bottled to provide a selective, non-chemical pest control. It has no effect on birds or earthworms, or honeybees, or adult butterflies. It will, since this is for caterpillars, of course it would affect the larvae of butterflies, but is considered safe for human consumption. And since then, they have different strains have been developed to target beetles, mosquitoes, and black flies. Here we are, mycorrhizal fungi again. It also performs in plant health. Mycorrhizal fungi can send signals between neighboring plants when one has been attacked. The neighboring plant will perform defensive maneuvers, and in this case, maybe release volatile chemicals to attract the insect's predator in order to save the plants. I think, have you ever had a situation where you have several of the same plant and one of them does very poorly and maybe even dies and the others seem to do fine? This could possibly be the reason. Soil organisms are very, very important. They're a small percentage of our organic matter, but they provide so many benefits, including purifying pollutants in water and being the source of most of our antibiotics. So if you want soil organisms, you need to feed them. Fresh residues are easily digested food for most soil microbes. And some add some mowed leaves or other fresh residue and just watch what happens. I put it on an area where there was nothing growing. It was an area I was going to start a new garden in. And just a few days I went out, there were worms, there were centipedes, sow bugs, all sorts of small animals moving that fresh residue into the soil. Then there's the decomposing organic matter. I guess we think mostly of our compost when we think of this. It's still active, but a little less so than the fresh residues. It's considered black gold by many gardeners, and it should make up around 40% of the organic matter in your soil. The last type of organic matter is the very dead. Humus is a stable source of well-decomposed organic matter. It's considered passive soil organic matter as it has finished the decomposition process. It retains moisture and improves soil structure and fertility. It's particularly high in lignin, which binds the cell fibers and vessels of wood and bark. And it stores carbon rather than releasing it as a greenhouse gas, so it is crucial for our environment. Hope we're doing okay. Do we have any questions? Anything I should address at this point?
There's no questions in the chat box as of now.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go on. Soil composition also affects soil fertility and pH. These two chemical properties are very important for a quality soil and plant growth. pH indicates the degree of acidity or alkalinity of the soil. It ranges from 0 to 14, and 7 is considered neutral. This chart shows how soil pH affects the ability of plants to take up various nutrients. The amount of the nutrients in the soil does not change with the pH. It's just how much is available to the plant. The ideal pH is about 6.5 to 7 for most plants. Unfortunately, my native soil tends to test closer to 8.0. If you look at this chart, you'll see that the bars are at 8.0. You'll see that the bars start to get thinner at phosphorus. Okay, potassium and sulfur, calcium, magnesium, but look at iron, at magnesium, boron, copper, and zinc. So my soils can have enough of these elements, but the roots cannot pick them up and utilize them. I had a very bad, I've had a lot of trouble with iron chlorosis because of this. Of course, if you have acidic soil, look at 5.5, you're going to have the same problems with probably some different nutrients. Bedrock composition and climate influence soil chemical properties such as pH. Our native soils that have not been highly fertilized or amended tend to be neutral to slightly alkaline, but it can vary within the same property. And I have found that too. Some areas are higher and some are lower in their pH. A soil test every 3 to 5 years is recommended. If you need to adjust your pH, be aware that it's a very slow process. It may require several incremental applications throughout different seasons. It's especially difficult in soils with more clay or more organic matter. And once you got it where you need it, it's not going to stop. Another year or two, you'll probably have to add some more. I love azaleas. I'm originally from St. Louis, and there's azaleas all over the place. But look at the pH. It doesn't, mine was 7.8, 7.9. So that was going to be a problem for me. I did try to amend my soil over and over again. I never did get it quite as low as I wanted, and I never could grow azaleas successfully. My favorite fruit, excuse me, is blueberries. I really wanted to grow those, but boy, that pH is even lower. So I gave up trying to grow it in my soil. And if you want to, if you do really want to grow this, my suggestion is to grow it in a container. Okay, chemical properties. These are the 3 macronutrients which plants need in the greatest amount. These are the numbers that you'll see, these are the chemicals you'll see represented by the numbers on your fertilizer packages. It's always in the same order: first nitrogen, then phosphorus, and then potassium. We all realize we may need at times fertilizer added to our soil. However, too much fertilizer is often a problem. People don't get a soil test and they just fertilize. I'm sure it's going to make it grow better or flower better, and so fertilizers are added. One problem is nitrogen fertilizer runoff. Also, too much phosphorus can cause a problem too. But I want to mention the nitrogen when we think of our lawns. I used to think that we should fertilize our lawn both spring and fall, and you still hear about it. However, if you are not going to irrigate your lawn throughout the summer to make sure it stays nice and green, if you're going to let it kind of go a little dormant, just water enough to keep it alive, you probably aren't going to need that second fertilizer application because you're not doing a lot of watering and the nitrogen is not flowing out of the soil with water. We had a very bad situation in our neighborhood. We have a lake, a neighborhood lake, and I got a phone call one day from neighbors that have their house on the lake telling me that large fish were jumping out of the lake and landing on the bank and dying. We didn't know what the problem was at first. Then I got another call and say, not only that, but now there's all sorts of dead fish floating in the lake. This problem was eutrophication. Eutrophication is from excess nutrients. It sets off a change reaction in the ecosystem, starting with an overabundance of algae and plants. The excess algae and plant material eventually decompose, producing large amounts of carbon dioxide and decreasing the amount of oxygen. These poor fish were suffocating. They ended up having to get a bulldozer to dig a big hole in the soil along the bank and push in all the dead fish. I mean, there were hundreds of them. So this is a no-no for over-fertilizing. Okay, so I hope I've tried to cover the properties of soil, but I think the thing we all need to know now is, what do we do about it? How do we have good soil quality? Hopefully you understand that soil is alive. It takes a long time to farm and yet can be destroyed in a very short time. So how do we conserve? Let's take a look. Number one, add organic matter. And remember, there's different types of organic matter. The living, when you are getting rid of your annual plants, your flowers, your vegetables, don't pull them out roots and all. Just cut them off slightly above the soil line. Leave the roots in there, in the soil. You can also plant cover crops. It's another way to leave roots in the soil. Okay, remember the other one was fresh residues. In this case, this ground really needs a lot of fresh residues. Make use of those fall leaves. Mow them over and put them on top of your soil. When you put it in a bare soil area especially, come back and look at it a few days later. It's like a dinner bell attracting worms, arthropods, and microorganisms to a holiday meal. You can also, in a vegetable garden, chop up the residue from your garden and leave it. And compost. Compost is fantastic, but I never knew what to do with it besides putting it in a planting hole, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I've now realized that just spread an inch or so across your edible gardens or your annual garden beds. You can broadcast an eighth to a quarter of an inch across your lawns, and you can use it in place of mulch around your trees, shrubs, and flowers. All right, the two caveats to incorporating organic matter. One is called the bathtub effect. We used to recommend that you add 25 to 50% organic matter to your soil when you backfill your planting hole. The problem is when roots meet the undisturbed soil, they do not like it. They want to stay in that nice loose soil, so they circle back into the amended soil, the planting hole. The other problem with this effect is that when you water, the water stays in the planting hole instead of draining out. Another problem with highly amended soil is when you create a berm or backfill and then plant in that. After just a year, definitely 2 years, organic matter has settled. It is dissolved, I should say. So if you've had 25 to 50% organic matter, once that settles, the roots will be out of the ground. Okay, second thing you can do, when you apply nutrients, fertilizers, pH, whatever, apply them per soil test. Learn your soil composition, pH, and fertility. Bring in your soil to the extension office. We'll send it to K-State, and in just a couple of weeks, you will get a report back telling you the analysis and also what you need to do to improve your nutrients in your soil. You can find out on our website or call into the office to find out the details of how to bring in your specimen. Okay, synthetic fertilizers. I like this picture here. Although they provide a quick source of necessary plant nutrients, synthetic fertilizers add nothing to improve soil composition or to build an environment beneficial to soil organisms. So for more sustainable fertility, add your organic matter first. Then test your soil and see if you need any additional synthetic or organic fertilizers. Number 3, avoid ruining soil structure. Heavy equipment is the worst offender of compacting soil. So if you're in a situation in this, like this truck down here, offload into partial loads from paved areas. So have the truck stay on your driveway or in the street and bring out a wheelbarrow or a dingo and offload that topsoil or whatever it is you're delivering in partial loads. Even repeated foot traffic can cause some compaction. Stepping stones reduce the compaction. So do raised beds. Soggy soil. This is just do not do this. No matter how much you are tempted, do not work the soil when it is wet. And tilling. This is something else that's changed over the years. We used to tell people, oh, till in all those amendments year after year. If you look at the soil in the picture with the rototiller, you see that it's pulverized. It's like powder. So you've totally destroyed soil structure when you've done this. The soil in the other picture is in clumps. This person is digging in with the shovel. She's just turning it over. She's not pulverizing it. Occasionally, you're going to have to use a rototiller. I do understand that. Maybe the area is large. But please try to still leave big chunks. Don't overdo it. If you are doing starting a new bed or have a new home and you need to till in amendments, figure that you're going to do it once. So do it well, incorporate it. And then figure on following years that you're just going to add it to the top, like we talked about earlier. How do you get that organic matter into your soil? Well, core aeration is a wonderful thing to do in the fall. Not only does it add pore space, but then you can put compost over your lawn, or you can just mow leaves up and leave them, and they will work their way into those holes. It's called vertical mulching. If you don't core aerate later on in the fall, you may still want to spread out some leaves or other organic matter. And as the winter progresses, it'll freeze, it'll thaw, and the soil will open up into big cracks, and you'll still incorporate some of that matter. I do want to mention new home construction, just in case you know somebody who's building a new home. Soil structures is destroyed. Horizons are mixed during home construction. So you can't do a whole lot with the structure being destroyed deeper down, but you can have them strip off the topsoil and move it, even if it's to a different site, and then bring it back for the final grade. That way your topsoil is on top rather than several feet under, and it's loose, it's not compacted. Number 4, do not allow bare soils. Bare soils are prone to erosion and do not support soil organisms and soil structure. There's different things you can do. If you have bare soil because of a runoff situation, go ahead and put some landscape fabric and some gravel down and create a dry creek bed. Another thing to do if you have fast moving water is to try to install maybe terraces to slow it down. Plant roots, again, keep it planted. If you can keep roots into the soil, they'll help hold it. All cover crops will do the same thing. Allow organic matter litter to accumulate. We've also talked about that some. And you can mulch areas that you want to stay bare. I put an unhappy face on the rock one here because I don't think mulching with rocks is a good idea. It's great for dry creek beds, but it is not good as a mulch. Okay, number 5, plant diversity over monoculture. Plant diversity, it's going to increase your soil organism diversity for a healthy soil. It can also reduce your chance of needing pesticides. I remember when we had a couple rows of Scotch pines that we planted in the back of our property. It was going to be a windbreak for us. However, along came the pine nematode and took them all out. We lost the entire area. Had it been planted with different variety of trees, we probably would still have some trees there. Crop rotation is also a good idea. You don't want to plant the same crop in the same place year after year because the bad bugs and organisms and bad fungi can stay into the soil and get that same vegetable or fruit every year. So move it around. I even do this with annuals. I don't know if it works with my particular situation, but I had a lot of aphids one year on my milkweed. So the next year I put them in a different spot. Hopefully the aphids won't find them quite as quickly. Number 6 is to use integrated pest management. This is a big topic. I can't cover it all, but I will briefly go over it. First of all, pesticide is a broad term. It includes herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, miticides, and the greater the amount and the frequency of application, the greater the negative effect. In integrated pest management, you use common sense, and you start with the least negative controls first. So prevention, things like watering in the morning instead of late in the evening, keeping your plants spaced enough for good airflow, keeping your garden tidy. Don't allow the diseased foliage to lay on the ground. Rotate crops. Avoidance. Avoid existing pests. When you plant natives, they've discovered that native soils have those mycorrhizal fungi that work with native plants. So they don't tend to get diseases as easily. Also, you can get pest-resistant plant varieties. Monitoring your pest and know your tolerance. Some pests aren't that bad. They're not going to kill my plant. They might not look as pretty as I'd like, but I'm going to leave them. Others, no, I can't tolerate those. They're too destructive. I'm going to have to do something. And last is suppression. Choose the method that has the least environmental impact first. Handpicking and cultural, mechanical, biological sprays, starting with the safest first, and pay attention to the life cycle and time of day. One example is if you're going to want to pick slugs off your hostas, don't go out in the middle of the day and expect to find them. Their life cycle, it tells you that they're going to come out at night, so go out with a flashlight. We can talk about bagworms. You can spray them in April. You can spray them in July, but you're not going to kill them. So why spray everything? They need to be sprayed in May when they're small, just coming out of their bags. Another thing to think about is herbicide drift. You don't want, when you're spraying, it needs, of course, be calm. where you're not going to spray unwanted plant materials, and follow the label directions. Oh, and bees. If it's something that can kill bees, please remember, spray in the morning early or spray late in the evening. Okay, I've talked a lot. I've tried to cover a lot of material here. Let me summarize what I hope you take from this. The properties of soil. Soil takes a long time to form and can be destroyed in a very short time. Soil texture is a balanced mix of clay, silt, and sand. It cannot be changed by adding sand or clay. It can be improved with organic matter. Soil has pore spaces that provide air and water to plant roots. Soils contain organic matter as living matter, fresh residue, decomposing residues, and humus. The more diverse the living organisms, the healthier the soil. The soil test is needed to know soil fertility and pH. And I hope you appreciate now the importance of soil. Healthy soils soak up and hold moisture, provide pore space for air exchange, and provide a continual and stable supply of important nutrients and minerals. Humus remains stable for many, many years and stores carbon that otherwise would be released as a greenhouse gas. So what are we going to do? The 6 steps, again, organic matter, amendments per soil test. Do not ruin your soil structure, avoid bare soils, plant diversity and rotate crops, and use integrated pest management. I wish you all success. I'm glad that so many of you are interested in the topic of soils, and I hope that I made this a little easier to understand. If there are any questions, please ask them. I'd love to try to answer them.
That was so great, Linda. Yes, it was very informative. I learned a lot. And I would like to invite everybody now to unmute yourselves or start your cameras, and we can have a little chat discussion.
I don't have any questions, but I just thought that was wonderful, Linda. You did a great job.
Yeah.
Soils is hard to make fun and like digestible, and you did a really good job.
Thanks. As I said, there's so much to learn about them. Every time somebody refers to soil as dirt, I just cringe. Oh,
No.
so much more.
Yeah, we don't allow that kind of talk in my house.
Well, anyway, it's very important. So I'm glad that you've tuned in. I know it's a lot to digest, but there's a lot of information you can get. And always contact the extension agent and ask questions if you have them. We're here for you. Okay.
Linda,
Very nice job, Linda.
Thank you.
Linda, there was one comment that kind of led to a question. Cindy Quinn has been growing blueberries, and just now learning about them needing lower pH, she was like, oh, no wonder. And if she were to follow your advice and try again maybe next year in pots, growing them in pots, does anybody know of any pH specific potting soil?
That's something we have to research. If she wants to contact the Master Gardener's response line, we can certainly see what we can find out. We can't. Go ahead, Eric.
I have a resource I'll share in the chat box, only because I wrote an article on it. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but there are things you can add. Most of our potting soils aren't going to have that pH, but there are things you can add. I will find that on our website, and I'll throw that in the chat box.
Thank you.
One of the things that my sister recommended was coffee grounds. So I've been putting coffee grounds around my hydrangeas and around my blueberries, but I don't know if it's making a difference. I've only done it this summer.
Susan, get a soil test. That is just, that is number one. You'll know exactly what your pH is now, and they will tell you how much of what to add. So it just takes the guesswork out of it.
That's a good idea. Yeah. There's I would imagine quite a lot of difference in the different spots in my yard since we've only been in this home for 15 years. So there just hasn't been a whole lot of time we're still seeing, the foundation around our place settle, really.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, I know that I have hydrangeas in the back, the macrophylla, and they can be blue or pink, depending on your soil pH. And I have them in an area that's probably 15, 20 feet circle, 15, 20 feet across. Some of them are pink, some of them are blue. So that's telling me that there's spots in my soil that are more acidic and spots in my soil that are a little more alkaline. So yeah, soil test from where you're going to plant your blueberries or azaleas or whatever it is you're concerned about. Is that it, Leslie?
Oh, sorry.
I just said, is that it, Leslie, anymore?
Yeah, Carol added that she had heard adding peat moss is great for blueberries, and Arrow confirmed that over in the chat box. But if we don't have any other questions.
I have one thing to say. It's not a question, but I wanted to thank Linda for the information she shared about how organic matter and the way it contributes to carbon sequestration and how it's a way to shrink your personal carbon footprint by creating compost in your home landscape and using it as a soil amendment. Good job, Linda.
Oh, thank you. I think we should all be concerned about our environment and understand what storing organic matter in the soil can do for us.
Just to add on the compliments, I am like drooling over your pictures of your garden. I mean, talk about resilience and
Nice.
diversity. They are so beautiful.
Well, thank you. I spend a lot of time playing, and I've become less, well, as you can see by this picture here, I kind of let it areas go pretty natural.
I love it.
All right, good.
Well, alrighty. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I hope you learned something new today like I did, and I hope you feel encouraged to protect your own living soil. So please join us next week at this same time for Shawnee County Master Gardener Ed Dillingham's presentation on xeriscape gardening. So we'll see you then. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Linda.
You're welcome.